Welcome to BFR Radio, a podcast dedicated to all things blood flow restriction training. This podcast is proudly sponsored by the BFR.co, where if you want to buy your own BFR cuffs, access online BFR training programs, increase your own BFR knowledge with the accredited BFR.co course, or you want more information about this type of training, this is your one place to go. And I'm your host, Dr. Chris Gavilio. Welcome to BFR Radio, everyone. Chris here, and I'm really excited for this month's episode. And I've got Kelly Penfold, a Level 3 ACA Elite Strength and Conditioning Coach. I've actually known Kelly for quite some time now and seen some of the fantastic work that she's done, not only with BFR, but in S&C in general. I was really excited for her to come on to this podcast to share her stories with you all. Now, at the time of this recording, she was working with the Queensland Firebirds netball team. They're a team based in Brisbane, Queensland in the national netball competition. Now, in the last couple of months, she's actually changed roles, and very exciting role for her now. She's working with the St. George Illawarra Dragons in the National Rugby League competition as a speed and conditioning coach. So I thought that I'd just put that out there. Let's now go over to the podcast and join in with Kelly Penfold. Welcome, Kelly Penfold, Strength and Conditioning Coach Extraordinaire.
Thank you.
Firstly, just introduce yourself, a bit of background before we get into how you've been using blood flow restriction in your work.
All right, can do. So I'm currently the head of strength and conditioning at the Queensland Firebirds, the netball team. I've been here for just a little under a year. Really, really loving it. Totally different change, working with one team in the pro space environment. My job as a whole is to kind of overlook the whole of Netball Queensland as well as work with the main high performance Firebirds squad. Prior to that, I was working at Queensland Academy of Sport for 7 years. Had a really great stint there, got to work with just a range of different Olympic sports and different kinds of athletes, from like your development guys through to the ones going to the Olympics. Really, really great combination of individual and team sports exposure while I was there, from triathlon to cycling to field hockey, softball and some track and field, rugby sevens. And then before that, I worked in the private space. So that's kind of where I started initially. Started in the private space, started in speed, agility style coaching and strength programs to complement that. And then, got to move through to QAS and kind of move my way through that organisation, and was just looking for, not so much looking, but this job popped up and I saw it and I saw netball and I love netball. And so I thought I just have to get down there and have a crack in that space. So really solid range of heaps of different sports. Been lucky to get the combination of things like swimming and endurance through to more of that cutting acceleration stuff where my heart sort of lays. So. Yeah.
I think that's what's really great about working in, say, like a private sector where you have lots of different clients, or in an institute or academy with lots of different sports. It gives you so many experiences, which actually improves your toolbox as a strength coach, so rather than pigeonholed as a one sport.
Yeah, just rugby, like just football, or
And your time will come when you niche into netball, but you'll be able to draw on some of the work that you would do in another sport. And it might be you use it once for one athlete, but I think that's really cool that you can draw on that.
Definitely. The combinations, I've often found that I'll have a sport, like it might be a sport like triathlon, and then I move back into something like hockey, and I get to take the concepts that I learn in that last sport that I work with, or that I might still be working with, and move them across, and you kind of get to give those athletes a different experience and a different take on it as well. So I feel like I'm constantly dragging from heaps of different experiences from my early days coaching, like from 8-year-olds, to actually pull that across to some of the girls that I'm working with here that are well experienced athletes.
Yeah, definitely. So being all things BFR and BFR Radio, we want to just draw our attention to that. How did you first come across BFR?
So I first came across BFR in the QAS gym with the man, the myth, the legend himself, Chris Gavilio. I watched him for a little while use it, I watched this guy use it for quite some time, and I think we probably had a few early conversations, and I was always really curious about just the different ways that it could be used. Like, it became really obvious to me really quickly that there wasn't just, it's just this one way that you can utilize something like BFR. There's a lot of different avenues, and to throw them on yourself and to give them a crack. And as soon as I kind of put them on and had a bit of a go with them, anything from like passive preparation for running for me through to seeing what it felt like to just load a few different exercises, and then obviously having you there to ask those questions and understand more deeply what you were already doing with your athletes and some of the hormone and priming piece. Just that whole combination, I just thought there's more here than meets the eye, and just ever since experimented with lots of different ways of using it and utilising the research that you've looked into, as well as a bit of the stuff that you talk about in different podcasts, as well as just the, I guess, the baseline research that is in that sort of osteoporosis, older populations. It's just so versatile, and so that's what probably hooked me in.
Yeah, I think your point about experimenting is key. It becomes, I don't know about you, but it becomes an aha moment.
Yeah.
And then, like as any coach with anything you do, whether it's BFR or a certain type of training periodization or a drill, when you trial it so many times, it's like, oh, I could do it in this sense. So this is all about sharing stories, because I think the stories has huge power.
Yeah.
Tell a little bit about your own sport in prowess, because you're quite a talented athlete yourself, and just how you used it and what you felt.
Yeah, so I like to participate in triathlons. I don't always call myself a triathlete. If I'm not as fit as I'd like to be, I'm just doing it for exercise. And then if I'm well fit and I'm about to race, I will call myself a triathlete. Have done a few sneaky age group Australian representations in there. But yeah, I would find a combination of going from netball and then into triathlon and kind of fluctuating between those sports for a little while. My initial exposure around the triathlon piece was probably, I get up early for these track sessions, and you sort of get up, give yourself about 10, 12 minutes, get yourself dressed and ready. I get in the car, I get to training, and you pretty much launch straight into running. So there's not a lot of that sort of prep piece that we might put together for our athletes. It's just you're straight on the track, you get moving, you can move slowly, that's okay, but it's not the biggest warm-up either before you get into a main session. And so I would throw the cuffs on, drive my 10 to 12 minutes to training, and I would just have them passively on while I was driving. And I just noticed the difference between getting out at the other end and taking them off and getting into my warm-up, how much warmer and ready to go I felt just after that small exposure. And I probably pumped them up to maybe 80% of what you would otherwise if you were going through another workout. But I would just do a bit of passive BFR on my way, get there, feel like maybe in the car I might do some little Tim Ant raises or some calf raises or something to kind of get the blood flowing a bit more. But yeah, take them off, get to training, and just feel like I could actually hit it straight away. And then the other part around my training personally and a bit of the buy-in was I got my first ever patella tendinopathy, courtesy of playing the infamous indoor soccer at QAS, which was a real ordeal. I decided to take indoor soccer back up almost in my first week at QAS at the same time that I picked netball back up again, after not having done it for probably about 12 months. And so a patella tendinopathy ensued almost immediately. And Chris was kind enough to lend some of his knowledge around how I could do some exercises at the start of my sessions to help with the tendinopathy and to help with the cuffs. He probably doesn't even remember that, but I do.
I do.
You do remember that? Yeah. I'd never had a tendinopathy in my life. I played netball from when I was 6 to like 25, and I took 12 months off, and next minute it's blown. It wasn't great load management, I'll admit that now. But yeah, just getting the cuff on, getting my ISOs done, getting a small other bits and pieces of exercise in there that helped the knee to feel so much better. And then I just would utilise it pretty consistently before all of my netball trainings and games, and lo and behold, it sort of dissipated out after a little while.
Yeah, and that's what I love about BFR as a tool. You're not doing any secret exercise. You're just adding it. But what it's doing is that traditionally we need high loads, what we call mechanical stress. But as I talk about on this podcast, we've got metabolic stress working to our advantage. And when you're sore, you don't like to load the body.
No.
And I've worked with other athletes, and one athlete I deliberately didn't do any BFR work for 6 weeks,
Yep.
and they still struggled with tendinopathy, the pain. Within 2 sets, totally gone the very first time they used it. And so once again, just shows the power of something really simple. And you could be anyone that, playing multiple sports, weekend warrior, professional athlete, put them on and do the exercises that just becomes a lot more effective, doesn't it?
Yeah, it definitely does. It's a shorter trick to sort of getting warm, which I think when we're talking about regular on the weekend punter even, and I've had a few athletes that I've coached that they're just triathletes, or they play a bit of football on the weekend, and I've recommended the BFR to them, and they've gone ahead and bought into it. And the big bit for them was they can put them on and they can do their warm up in like 5 to 6 minutes, and they're actually good to go off the back of that to get into their sport. Like, I think that again, that's probably one of those aha moments when I threw them on. I think it was one of the hockey players, maybe, and he just found like he was just ready to go a lot faster than what he'd anticipated. And so that was a bit for me like, okay, there's something there.
Yeah, and it's the reality of the real world is like not all athletes, have half an hour to do the perfect preparation. They don't have the physios and all the support team around them to get themselves ready. And you can carry it in your bag. And I think the other piece, which what I like there is that you got to keep doing it. You can get pain relief for 24 hours. Some people even longer. But it's like anything. Even take the BFR piece out. If you've got a tendinopathy, it's been your 1 week of exposure that's blown the tendon up. But it's months and months of repair and work, and you can just do it more effectively or efficiently, or you can do a little bit harder. So that comes down to...
Certainly not a silver bullet, but you can get a little silver bullet that gives you buy-in to then utilise it later.
Yeah, definitely. And you spoke about your own story. You do it passively, and passively is quite easy because you sit there.
Yeah.
The first time you did an actual set with them on, what was the feeling?
Just legs full of blood, working... It's funny because it's like, it feels like you're working harder and doing more than what you're actually doing. But then depending on, and I think we've spoken a bit about this before around the individual response, but generally speaking, I'd take them off and I'd feel really good. So it's not like I'd take them off and feel like I'd done a lot more, but whilst I was actually performing any of the really basic exercises, like just full of blood, feel like that pump, like if you're doing sprints on the bike and your quads just fill up with blood, is that sort of feeling. And so just, throwing them on and like punching out something that's as simple as some squats and some lunges and some mini band and some glute stuff. And then next minute I'm just pumped up and raring to go, and you get this great feeling taking them off, but to then not really be sore or uncomfortable after you've just been experiencing that for a bit of time, which I enjoyed as my experience, again says to me, if I've got an athlete that's deloaded and needs to feel like they've done something, it's like the perfect stimulus to give them to think, I'm actually doing some leg work, even though they're probably not doing heaps of mechanical work.
Yeah, definitely. I remember one of the first times I ever started incorporating this in an athletic population, working in an AFL team. We had like 3 lower limb injuries, all in boots. And the physios would say, just go ride a bike. And we all know that they're getting nothing out of a bike session, but we've got to start somewhere, hey? And really interesting, as soon as we put the cuffs on, they're going, I actually feel like I'm doing some work with no mechanical stress through that joint or the ligament. So now tell us, what were some of the protocols that you would use with some of the athletes that you would have worked with?
So I probably haven't run the real typical 30, 15, 15, 15 protocol. I think maybe with 1 or 2 early day tendinopathy athletes, I might have run that with them. Typically I've gone off a bit of the idea of get them moving, utilize the cuffs to get them through ranges that they maybe like just can't load for a really standard number of sets and reps, lots and lots of different movements while they've got the cuffs on, really around like prep, like heaps and heaps of stuff with the cuffs on with prep. And what I would say is I do a bit of the 2 minutes on, 1 minute off. So that's sort of typically probably more of our passive BFR exposure, but I've put them on the athletes and they do 2 minutes of their prep and then they take them off for a minute and do something else, and then they pop them back on and they do another 2 minutes of their prep. So they're getting a bit of that on and off. But it's really more sort of trying to feel our way through it with a low-ish number of sets, a moderate number of reps, and just trying to get them through all different kinds of movements. So I have to say I probably don't have a strict protocol that I've worked off, aside from probably chatting to you and talking about, 70% of their max, maybe with some of their strength work. I think we talked about you could go as low as sort of 30 or 40, but if they're an athlete, they're not really getting any stimulus out of that and actually any additional external load. It's probably okay to go up to that sort of 70% marker for a few of the different movements with the cuffs on. So I think that those are really, my protocols are probably a bit loose for you, Chris, but.
However, with your protocols, so if we look at your light load stuff, you're saying doing lots of movements, are they all supersetted in like a circuit?
Yes, yeah.
So then collectively, your first set might be how many reps?
12.
But then how many exercises?
4.
So you got 48 reps.
Yeah.
And I guess this is more my point. I personally could not do 30 reps. I would just get bored.
Yeah.
But I would happily do a circuit of like 10 to 15 repetitions of each. Then all of a sudden you're hitting actually more than 30 reps. And the key is the physiological response. The key is that feeling of fullness, the lactate, the pump, whatever you want to call it. That's the key. Now, whether you achieve that in 30 reps, whether you achieve that in 15, in my opinion, does it really matter? Yeah. And so with athletes, if they get bored, they're going to turn off.
Yeah.
If you've got people who have never trained before, to ask them to do 30 repetitions is a lot. Yes. So you'd probably turn them off.
Yeah.
So you're doing something that's really different to what they've done before. I think that's the key. And there is research out there about 3 sets of 15 as shown to be effective. And they say, well, could have you got a better effect out of the 45 rep protocol? Because we're now taking it out of the academia world where we're doing one exercise, looking for a specific response. This is one part of the bigger piece of puzzle, whether they're managing a tendinopathy or managing a rehab. They then got to go and do another 2, 3, 4 sessions over the next few days. So it's part of the puzzle. And I think that's, as practitioners, when in the applied world, we need to remember that it's one piece.
It is, yeah. And I think that it's almost the time and attention or the exposure to lots of different reps and different movements that they need to perform, again, really helps the athlete to think, I can really feel my glutes when I do this glute exercise, or I can really feel my quads when I do this quad exercise. And they're not actually probably getting as much load if I'm either prepping them or I'm deloading them, but they really feel like they're hitting all those areas that they need to hit to be prepared to do whatever it is they need to do next. So there's that variety of, I've used them with one of the netball girls that we deload her actual weight, so she's got to have more reps because that's the only way we get the overload. Whereas there's other ones that they've been injured, so as I'm rehabbing them back in, I need to start with a lower number of reps, and just as we would normally, it's just that progressive overload, a few more reps, maybe bring the weight up, a few less reps, bring the weight up more, and it's just finding that tipping point in between.
Yeah, and as athletes, we need to progress them out of that rehab into performance lifting, and very few research is done on elite athletes. It's all done on recreational athletes or so forth. So it's
probably why I've been a bit like going with more of like the gauge rather than the really specific academic protocol.
Yeah, and I think the big key is that you're getting buy-in with the athletes. They feel like they're getting a response out of it, and you're probably getting more work out of them than if you weren't using it as a tool, I'm assuming.
Yes, definitely. I look at some of the reloading exercises, particularly in the rehab space, and I'm watching the athlete go through this session just thinking what they're used to versus what they're doing right now it's so far apart. And they have to earn the right to progress, and there's tissue tolerance that we've got to build back up. But what can I also be doing at the same time to be giving them a really good response? And when we know that there's some hormonal markers that actually might be either helping to heal whatever they've got going on there or promoting some other response. And it's essentially something that we can get for free with the things that they were going to be doing anyway. And they feel like they've put a bit more work in. So it's kind of that like triangle, it's a triple threat.
Yeah, that's a really nice way of explaining it. So can you tell a couple of success stories on they start here and then they've finished at this point here and they've come so far, and probably without even realising it.
Yeah.
So just highlight that with a story or two.
Yeah, I've worked with a few of the cycling guys that if anyone's worked in typically endurance cycling, but you get this a bit with the track cyclists, they don't always love to lift. They might ride like 4 to 6 hours in a morning and then they've got to come in the afternoon and they're going to have a session. Don't always feel like lifting anything super heavy. And so initially I thought, okay, I'm going to try some BFR with some of these guys to see how they are adapting to it and see how they maybe change their strength output, and we'll test and retest, but we'll lift just submaximally the whole way through while they've got this big riding block. And so I threw the cuffs on 2 of them. They loved it because they were like, oh, I only have to lift however much today. She's not making me do the super heavy weights. And yeah, effectively we saw a change. We retested I think it was a trap bar deadlift was probably our main one that we tested pre and post, and we saw a big change in that. And then through that, getting that bit of buy-in off the back of that, they actually wanted to play around with well, what if we did lift a bit heavier and still got to wear the cuffs? Like, what would that look like and how would that feel? And to put it in context, these guys, when they're on the track or when they're climbing a hill, they get that feeling of the quad swelling and they get that uncomfortable just accumulating of lactate and having to push through the pain to the back end, and that real like almost restricted movement that you can feel with the cuffs on, that kind of goes side by side with cycling. And so in their head, they're going, if I can lift this heavy weight with a fair amount of pressure on my quads and really work through that burn, they then get on the bike the next day or a few days later and they do that hill effort or they have some sprints and they're channeling that feeling and thinking like, one, I can do it because I've pushed myself through the BFR, but also it feels really good because they've just had that exposure with the cuffs on. So that was their feedback to me as something that they'd like to try because it felt really sport specific.
What you could be saying there is in the gym, you're able to reproduce that same feeling, which you've got to love that feeling as well.
Yeah,
so
you do. Yep.
If you could reproduce that another twice in the week in another setting, but it's probably not as taxing as a bike session.
Yeah, no.
That therefore you would think you would have an adaptation to that stress or that feeling or that stimulus. We'll call it that feeling.
Yeah.
You would think that when they then get onto the bike, that they're like, oh, I'm actually able to smash through this. I'm actually generate some power, although it's from the gym.
Yeah, definitely. And just the feeling of the accumulation of blood through the quad, like there's actually nothing that matches that the same way that it feels when they're on the bike. So
with the cyclists, you do trap bar, deadlift with it on.
Yep.
Give us a couple of exercises that you would do with it.
So we would squat with the cyclists. They don't love the axial load through range. The range of motion that they need to produce force, some of them are happy to go super low, some of them aren't. But there's a handful of them in the triathletes that we didn't always go to a super low deep squat. So doing more of like a partial range or box squat with the cuffs on, again, meant that I felt like I was getting a bit more of a stimulus out of them while they weren't quite going through a full range. So we'd do some kind of back squat to box or just limited depth, do the trap bar, and then some single leg press, really, really high reps with the cuffs on, just single leg after single leg after single leg, and effectively just trying to smack them up at the end of the session. It's like you're doing kind of the strength endurance, which, is it strength, is it endurance? Aren't they already getting that on the bike? Maybe you don't need to hit it, but I feel like getting the strength endurance piece in a single leg press with the BFR, like you're getting that increase in your growth hormone and you're getting this feeling of fatigue either when they're not able to do some stuff on the bike, so maybe the cycling bit's been taken away from them, or if they're a triathlete, the running bit's been taken away from them, so they get that really nice feeling single leg, or we're actually getting some genuine strength load with an extra metabolic load that they wouldn't otherwise get, because you can only push so much force on the bike for that many reps, but you can do it in the gym.
Yeah, and also you can work really hard, which is going to give you a response. But if you would try to achieve that response with the cuffs off, you're either going to have to do a lot more reps or a lot more load.
Yep.
And you get sore. Your
Yes.
attachments are sore, and then having to then
Try to ride.
run,
Or do whatever the next thing is.
Is difficult. And then we start to lose sight of what's our role as a strength coach. Yes, it's to build a much more stronger, powerful, resilient athlete, but it's also, in my opinion, is to give an athlete to the coach that they can do a good job with what they're supposed to be doing, riding a bike or running or so forth.
Yeah, definitely.
So that's a really nice performance piece. Have you got a nice rehab, return from injury story that...
Yep. Sure do. Leading into pretty significant international competition, had one of the triathletes, typical triathlon, they get stress fractures. It happens. We do our best to prevent them. We can only do what we can do. When they're working in the margins that they're working in and they're pushing themselves all the time, they're always at that point where that comes with some risk. If they're not pushing up to that point, they're probably not pushing themselves into a competitive space. So working with an athlete, she ended up with a sacral stress fracture. Essentially what that meant for her was what was going to be about 10 weeks of prep. She was totally deloaded, lower body, could barely walk around a certain amount on her legs for a particular amount of time. There was a bunch of even upper body strength work that she was prohibited from doing. Essentially anything that required a level of stabilization around her hips or trunk was out of the question. So we were down to like all seated exercises, all light, lots of reps, could do some seated tib ant raise, but couldn't do seated calf raises was the level that we started at for about 3 weeks, super restricted. And so we're leading into this huge international competition. She's got to go because she's been selected. I essentially just brought the cuffs in and said, look, we're going to at least get some kind of passive and systemic effect as a result of using these cuffs. So she would put them on, just maneuvering around the gym, probably not really loading a particular movement or anything for her early, but just passively wearing them as she went around the gym, and she did some curls, she did some tricep push downs, she'd do some tib ant raises, like the absolute bare minimum to start. As we were able to load more, I basically kept the cuffs on her the whole way through for all of her session, and we would just do a bit of the not have them on for longer than sort of 10 minutes, take them off, give her a rest, get her to move around, do a couple of things, pop them back on, and then continue through. And so as she started to be allowed to ride on a stationary bike, she'd wear the cuffs and she'd just keep them at a very low threshold, and she'd wear them for about 20 minutes. She'd do some riding without them again, and then she'd pop them back on for another 20. And she literally wore them the whole way through, because there was no point in time across her reload that we could get some really genuine sort of resistance through her, because we just didn't have the time while we were also trying to get swim, bike and run in there. She just wore them for every single exercise. We just get our time on, time off right. She felt like early days, when mentally it's quite tough to know you're not doing anything, she felt like she got some really good leg load. Simply like needed to be a systemic effect from it. Like the way that she bounced back, it's almost like no way that there could have not been. And like what we know from the research around the different markers that it might have for sort of bony remodeling really suggested to me off the back of her experience that those are certainly true. And as she got back into her running, we did a little bit of her running drilling with the cuffs on before she'd then jump on an Alter G unweighted and just get some really lightly weighted, high rate of work done. So she'd wear the cuffs almost like she'd been on the bike. She'd pump her legs up a whole bunch in her gym session, and then she'd jump on the Alter G, take them off, run super quick and light, and she'd get a bit of that feeling of going from bike to run. And she just, over the whole, I think it was a 10-week period, she just had them on, the whole way through. And she got to the race and she did what she needed to do. So
what a great story.
That's a
wonderful story. And sometimes it's when athletes are at their last chance saloon, is that they'll try anything,
Yep.
obviously legal, of
Yep.
course,
Yes.
that they'll say, okay, I'll do it. And having the experience that you've had, the relationship piece is important, especially when someone's an elite athlete. They've got a lot to lose from things going wrong as well. But things couldn't get any worse.
No.
Yeah. Beautiful stories there. As we start to wrap this up now, any other thoughts on BFR in general, or just anything there?
Yeah, I think for us at Netball, it's certainly been something in around the tendon piece that we've really tried to promote with the girls the whole year. We've got a couple of players that for various reasons would be deloaded from some conditioning, or a couple of them had either Achilles or some knee problems, and we would get the girls to wear them for most of their prep and a good piece of their warm-up, and at different kinds of levels of exposure. So the one with the bad knees, she was basically fully deloaded from most lower body exercises. So she would just go whatever movements wouldn't irritate them with the cuffs on, with whatever load she could handle for reasonably high reps. One of the girls that would get cranky knees from time to time and just didn't quite do all of the same kind of conditioning as everybody else. We'd pop the cuffs on her, she'd do some of her conditioning, she'd do her prep piece and her warm-up and go out onto the court feeling really, really good, probably the best that she's felt in a few years at her netball career when she'd been getting some of those issues. And then another one of them, mad Achilles problems, again, had to deload quite a few of her lower body movements, so we cuffed her for those. And she'd get a bit of that analgesic effect from the cuffs and just would gradually, it'd take a long time to warm up, but the difference between having them on and not having them on, she didn't do some of her other strength exercises with them because she actually didn't feel as good wearing them. And rather than trying to push her through that bit and go, oh, I think that there's probably a positive effect out of this even if you're not comfortable, no, take them straight off her for the bits that she didn't enjoy, leave the cuffs on her for the bit that she didn't enjoy. And yeah, just getting that sort of analgesic effect at the start of the session, gradual warm up for her with them on, just built the confidence in the process as well. So we've got sort of 3 athletes regularly popping them on, full buy-in, full belief, and genuinely making a difference for them. So.
Yeah, and personalising it to the athlete, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
Great piece. Wonderful stories. I feel like there's more stories there, but that's where we're going to leave it today. Really appreciate your time. Okay. How can people follow you? I do know that you've got some stuff going on Instagram.
I do have some things going on Instagram, and I have a lot of content that is sitting there that needs to be posted. So it's Key Athletic Performance, or KAP Training, on Instagram, or otherwise I'm getting better at using LinkedIn and trying to share and promote things on there. So the more people that I have jumping on there to check it out, the more motivated I'll be to put some more stuff out there.
And what's that under in LinkedIn?
It's just Kelly Penfold.
So I know I've known Kelly for a while now, not only a fantastic person, but does some wonderful stuff in terms of S&Cs. Good luck with the rest of your journey. Really look forward to seeing what else you're doing, not only with BFR, but just S&C in general. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
And that's all today for this episode of BFR Radio. I hope you enjoyed it. Remember to catch up on lots of great BFR training content on our Instagram page, which is @thebfr.co, or alternatively on Twitter, which is @thebfr_co. For more information and to order your own set of BFR cuffs, please visit our website, which is www.thebfr.co. Thanks for listening, and remember to keep the pump.